Welcome to our lecture on scientific writing. This is the second part on scientific writing, which will deal with the structure of a research paper and the basic of writing of a research paper. Let me share the presentation with you. As I mentioned, this is a part 2. And in this session, as we have mentioned in the outline, we'll be handling different sections of the paper and some basics about the writing of the research paper. Okay. So this is the hallmark of scientific writing. 6 qualities that were recognized as a hallmark of great scientific writing were: the writing should be fluid, organized, clear, concise, convincing, and interesting. So these qualities were identified as the hallmark of a great scientific writing. And when we consider a journal manuscript, an average journal manuscript of 25 to 40 pages, which is written in double-spaced format. So the size of that manuscript is described as shown in the screen. Title, it should be short and informative, and abstract should be a 1 paragraph generally. There are other types of structured abstracts also, but normally abstracts were 1 paragraph, so less than 250 words, and the introduction is about 1.5 to 2 pages of double-spaced page layout, and the methods will be again 2 to 3 pages. Results about 6 to 8 pages. Discussion again 4 to 6 pages, and the conclusion will be about 3 paragraphs, maybe 1 or 1.5 pages. And then if there is any additional figures, that will be 6 to 8 figures, which can be represented in a single page. Then tables, that is also 1 to 3 tables, which can be presented in another page. And about 20 to 50 references for a paper, which can be represented in 2 to 4 pages. So this is the overall size of a research paper and the different sections that is coming under the scientific writing. So each section, when we are writing, we have to keep this size in mind. Now, how to write a scientific report? A scientific report documents all aspects of experimental investigation. This includes a title, the aim of the experiment, the hypothesis, then introduction part to the relevant background of the theory, then methods used for, that is methodology, results, then discussion and interpretation of the results, then finally the conclusion. And of course, the references and other things will be there, but generally this is the pattern, or this is the order of the different sections that is coming under the scientific report. And scientific reports, they allow their readers to understand the experiment without doing it by themselves. So everything needs to be, even the minor details of the experiment needs to be explained with a proper methodology in the paper. In addition, scientific reports give others the opportunity to check the methodology of the experiment to ensure the validity of the results. The scientific report is written in several stages, and we usually write the introduction, aim, and hypothesis before performing the experiment, because that is the initial part of our induction and theory generation, etc. So that part is actually initially done before performing the experiment. Then we record the results during the experiment, and we complete the discussion and conclusion after the experiment. So this is how usually a report is generated. So At least the introduction, aim, and hypothesis, etc., even methodology part that can be arranged before performing the experiment. Now, there are some general rules about writing scientific reports. Learning how to write a scientific report is different from writing English essays or speeches. So our scientific report and normal essays or speeches that they actually adopt different patterns. So it will be different. You have to use passive voice in scientific reports, which you should avoid in writing in other subjects like English. So usually if it is a science subjects, uh, such passive voice will not be used. So when a scientific report, passive voice will not be used. So whereas in other subjects, we will avoid, okay, in English you can use passive voice, but or other subjects, uh, but for a scientific report, the usage of passive voice is not recommended. You have to always use an active voice of communication. Now, past tense language should be preferred because you already completed the experiment. When reporting something, the methodology and all the evidence and all the discussions should be in the past tense. Now, headings and subheadings should be added wherever necessary so that your introduction or other things can be uh, organized in a proper manner. And a pencil, you require a pencil to draw scientific diagrams and graphs because if you are incorporating a diagram or of a nowadays we can synthesize or you can create graphs using computer programs. But if you are drawing such diagrams, maybe you require a pencil or some other tools, or you have to create your own diagrams for avoiding plagiarism. And if you are using some images from the internet or from some other sources, certainly you have to obtain the permission and from the concerned owner of the or the copyright owner. Otherwise, it will be a part of the plagiarism. So usually you require a drawing of your own if you want to incorporate diagrams in the paper. And graphs nowadays you don't have to draw the graphs; it can be uh, generated using any statistical packages or a graph generation tools like a statistical package or even Microsoft Excel, then Origin, or there are other tools like that. Uh, and that type of tools for graph generation needs to be used. Again, simple and clear lines of scientific diagrams for scientific diagrams should be added, and for every scientific diagram we have to give a simple description line, what does it mean, and that type of clear title statements should be added. Then tables and graphs should be added wherever necessary in the report so that it will convey the message very clearly, and instead of reading a handwritten report, a table or a graph will give a precise idea or a consolidated idea about the concept. Now, when we come to the details of the scientific report, the first part is the title. A good title should provide reasonable answers to the following two questions. Does the title of your manuscript, seen in isolation, give a full yet concise and specific indication of your work reported? So, if you are just mentioning the title of your work, will that title give a clear-cut idea about the uh, focus and objective of the work? So, then the title is a suitable one. If not, if your title doesn't give a clear-cut idea about your work, then that needs to be modified. Would someone interested in the exact topic of your paper, reading this paper, be inclined to read the abstract? So, in this presentation or in this lecture, I will be focusing more on the title because that is a major aspect in writing a research paper. Because if somebody want to locate your article and start reading your abstract, then your title should be appropriate. Otherwise, it will be excluded and nobody will look into the contents of your paper. So even the search services from the databases were also looking into the title. So the one who sees the title should be interested in getting into the details of the paper, like abstract and the other full text contents. In the previous session, we discussed that there is a user preference for of reading, which includes initially the title. The first preference is title. So if it is a proper title, then they will look into the abstracts. Then if it is fine, they will look into the tables and graphs or the actual results. And then if it is fine, they will go to the results and conclusions or in the conclusion part where how they interpreted the results. And if that much part is satisfactory, then only they will look into the entire paper and read it in detail. So the selection of your of the concerned paper by a researcher is generally it starts from the title. And even the meta-analysis programs and systematic review process, everything that will depend upon the quality of the title. So this is about the requirement of a good title. Now the title of paper, it should contain if as few words as possible. Many journals limit the titles to 12 words. So the length of the title should be minimal and should be easy to understand, and it should be unique and memorable. And you have to describe the contents of the paper accurately and specifically in the title. So that, as I mentioned, the title should give a clear-cut idea about the nature of the work or the objective of the work. And you have to avoid abbreviations, formulas, and jargons in the title. And if you are using an abbreviation in the title, that is not self-explanatory. So in that case, it is better to avoid. But there are some recommendations that if you are, if it is absolutely necessary, you can use that one. That such formats were also accepted. But generally, if it is possible, you can avoid abbreviations, formulas, and jargons in the title. Now, do not include verb in the title. So you in the title, take care that no verb words are included. Now, does not contain or it should not contain low impact words such as some notes on or observations on, investigations on, or study of, or effect of. If you are starting your work or starting your title with such a word, then that will have a very low impact. It's a very generalized statement. And of course, uh, it should not be flashy, just like a newspaper title. Like to avoid statements like agroforestry can stop deforestation. Maybe that's just like a news title. So that type of flashy titles needs to be avoided because our work is a scientific report. It is not intended to make a sensation or something. Okay. Now, follow the style and preference of the target journal because from journal to journal, they'll have their own specifications. Just like in the first sentence, some journals limit the words to 12 words, or some may not. Some may accept, say, abbreviations in the title. And that type of journal to journal differences will be there in their preferences. So, and even in every stage, including title to references, each journal will have their own policies and their own styles. So you have to go through the directions to the authors in the concerned journal, and then prepare your article or your abstract, sorry, your manuscript in such a way that it suits the style of the journal. Now, this, of course, along with the title, there should be a running head or running title for the paper. A running head of the paper is an abbreviated title that will be printed on every page or alternative pages of the in the header part of the paper. So if you are taking a paper of 25 pages, on every alternative page of that paper, there will be a running head, short running head. A two-line heading cannot be or a title cannot be printed on the header part. So you have to provide a better abbreviated title that can be printed with the space of a half of the line. So that type of header title should be provided for the paper. The journal's instructions will specify the nature of the running heads and maximum number of characters, including spaces allowed. So you have to stick on to that policy, and that running title will be printed on the top of all alternate pages. The running heads should attract the browsing and it should attract browsing readers' attention. So if somebody is looking into the paper, this running head also should attract the readers' attention so that they will stick onto the into paper, and they'll or it will raise some interest or curiosity in the paper. Now there are four different categories of titles. The first one is a descriptive title. Descriptive title, it describes what the paper is about. So, for example, is investigating the role of academic conferences on shaping the research agenda. So that's take it as a title. So that is a descriptive title about the nature of the work. Whereas there are declarative titles, which makes the statement about the results presented in the paper. So, for example, the declarative titles is making some specific statements about that work. So, improvement of constructive heuristics using variable neighborhood descent. That is a result of the paper. That is a part of the result of the paper. For scheduling a flow show with sequence dependent setup time. So that is actually that describes the actual content of the paper. Okay, so that type of declarative statements which stick on to the original hypothesis is another type where we have a declarative title can be used. Now there are interrogative titles in which we present it as a question format. Do academic conference shape the research agenda, for example? So that take it as a title. So it is in the question format. So you can give a title in interrogative form by raising the title as a question. Now there are compound titles which may combine several of the above several of these above formats: descriptive, declarative, or interrogative, separated by colons. And for example, increase in flexibility colon, then productive or counterproductive, then a study on. So it includes all the types. That different categories of the titles can be mixed together in a compound title, and that will be long, and it may give a better description about the work. So that type of titles were also used. Here you can see one example of a actually manuscript title. For example, dendritic cell immunoreceptor is a new target for anti-AIDS drug development, colon, and identification of DCIR or HIV-1 inhibitors. And this is a manuscript title. Say it is actually can be treated as a compound title because it is separated by colon and gives further description. The run-in title, which is actually about the previous one is about 117 characters with spaces and 103 characters without spaces. That is the size of the manuscript title. Whereas 40 characters with spaces and 35 characters without spaces is the running title. Inhibitors of DCIR limit the HIV infection, which can be a suitable running title which can be printed on the top of all alternative pages. Now, here, while designing the title, let us analyze the title. You can see that the authors combined a few strategies here to reduce the title length by 2/3, applying the abbreviation DCIR in the running title, omitting articles, and focusing on what they judge to be central concept. So in this, the central concept is a limitation of HIV infection by the inhibitors rather than the novelty of the target. So here the new target or the novel target is not the focal point, whereas the focal point is the action of that that drug, where means the inhibitor the limitation of HIV infection by these inhibitors is the actual focal point of the work. So it highlights the running title will highlight the inhibitors of DCIR, limit HIV infection. That is the actual focal point. So the running title highlights that one, whereas the new target of the antimicrobial drug, so the novelty concept of the title is ignored in the running title because the action is important, not the novelty. Okay. And then you can see that the limitation of HIV-1 infection by the inhibitors rather than the novelty of the target and the application of drug development or the identification process. All these things were not relevant when it is compared with the actual action of the drug. Now, of course, this task may be easier for papers with a narrower and the more descriptive focus, such as review articles. So, if you are using such review articles, you can have it is quite more easy to generalize the topic. So, reviews were generalized because it incorporates the contents of a lot of papers, and such reviews can be presented with very short titles because they present some generalized concepts. So, with the increasing generalization, the title can be more and more shorter. So, this is one of the papers, is my own paper with Srina. So, that can be considered as one a compound title which incorporates two parts with separated by column. Now, this is one example. We will discuss one or two examples here. So, in the example 1, the original title, for example, the original title is a preliminary observation on the effect of salinity on benthic community distribution within a estuarine system in the North Sea. So, that was the original title. So, the title can be revised as below: effect of salinity on benthic distribution within a specific sanctuary name. Okay. So, that is a suitable title. Why? You can see the comments. Long title distracts the readers. Remove all redundancies such as studies, the nature of, etc. Never use expressions such as preliminary. You have to be precise. Preliminary observations or some general observations. That type of term should be avoided. So, the revised title will be shorter and more effective. Take the case of another example. Here, action of antibiotics on bacteria is the original title. The revised one is inhibition of growth of Mycobacterium tuberculosis by streptomycin. Action of antibiotics on bacteria may be suitable for a review paper. You can perform a review, but now since there are a lot of papers, review papers already published with the same title, there is no relevance for such a review. So, if you want to perform such a review, then it should be on a specific paper, because there are many review articles published with the same title already, and if it is not, then a shorter title will be suitable. But in this case, since there are a lot of other papers which is already published with the same title, action of generalized action of antibiotics on bacteria, the novelty of the paper or the further reviewing that paper is insignificant. So, in that case, we require, even if it is a review paper, you have to go for more specific work with focusing on some particular area. Here in this case, the second title is the revised title is the best one, even though it is longer, because the title should be specific. The previous one, the first one, is not specific. It doesn't describe the nature of the work, and the objective of the work is not actually identifiable in the first original title. Think about how will I search for this piece of information when you design the title. For example, if somebody is searching for some works related with Mycobacterium or streptomycin, etc., then the original the action of antibiotics on bacteria, that article will not be listed in the search results. So if you want your work to be specifically made available to the researcher who is searching for these paper, then your title should be incorporated with the key points like Mycobacterium tuberculosis and streptomycin. Then only the keywords Mycobacterium and streptomycin. Those who are working in the same area, searching for such a paper, or who is interested in streptomycin, or who is working on Mycobacterium and tuberculosis, will search with the search terms, and your article will be listed only at that point. Whereas such a generalized title will not be listed in the search results. Now, take the example of a title that is given, for example, a new approach to blind multi-user detection based on inter-symbol correlation. So it's just a title, any title, it is from physics field or electronics field. So that title, you can analyze the title. The word approach is vague. Instead, words such as method, technique, system, algorithm, or technology could be used. So approach, which type of approach that is not actually mentioned in that, or it is not specified in that title. So instead of using a new approach, a new method or technique, system, or algorithm, or technology, and that type of words will be more suitable, because the first one, approach, is actually a vague idea. Now, the title need not start with a new. New does not indicate what is new or what makes it new. That is not mentioned in the title. So, using such new, that term new is not relevant there. Now, the contribution is not clear. If the intersymbol correlation is new, it should be at the front. For example, intersymbol correlation for a blinding multi-user detection. So you can start with so if it is new, and if it is that intersymbol correlation is the more important part or the significant part, then you can start with that portion. Hmm? Then if intersymbol correlation is not new, the author has and the author has modified the method. So because there is a new approach to do something, and this method is based on intersymbol correlation. It is not exactly the same method, but it's a method based on intersymbol correlation. So that means the author has modified that procedure, and in that case, this would be the case for the use of a based on, because you can the method is actually modified. So it's a method based on a particular method. In that case, the author can tell clearly the benefit of the modified method, or the method for this modification, or the reason for this modification should be mentioned. Here it is a modified method, it's not a standard method. So you need to give stress on why such a modified method is used. Now, different versions of the research title of a research paper. Version 1, that is a hydrophobic property of sol gel hard coatings. That is a one version. Then second version is increasing hydrophobicity of sol gel hard coatings by chemical and morphological modifications. Then third version, increasing hydrophobicity of sol gel hard coatings by mimicking the lotus leaf morphology. So when we come to the third one from the first one is a very general. It doesn't convey much about the research work. In the second case, again we have an increasing quality of the title, because there the methodology by chemical and morphological modification, how this hydrophobicity of sol gel hard coatings were increased, that method is specified in the second one. And in the third one, even though it is shorter, it will have a better explanation, or a specific the title actually specifies what type of modifications were done. So even though the length is much less, that the quality of the title will be much better. So you can see, or if you are writing a paper, You can write alternative titles, 3 or 4 titles, or many titles can be alternatively written, and analyze in such a way that whether it describes your work, whether there is the usage of unnecessary words, unnecessary claims, etc. And for a scientific paper, whether it specifies, it is the title is more specific, and whether it is incorporated with the keywords, so that the researcher who is searching for that will be getting this result in the search box. So that type of considerations needs to be done while modifying that title of the article. So this is about the title. Now the second part is the introduction. So introduction or the background information. So that is the next part. So introduction actually begins with begin the introduction with clearly identifying the subject area of interest. You have to establish the context by providing a brief and balanced review of the pertinent published literature or the existing published literature. So existing published or the current status of the work needs to be clearly and briefly reviewed and presented there. Clearly state the purpose of the study. So in the introduction, you have to subject area of interest should be presented, then current status of the work needs to be presented, and purpose of the study needs to be mentioned. Then provide a clear statement of the rationale for the approach to the problem studied. So why you are studying this? What is the relevance of this work that needs to be mentioned, and describe the organization of the paper so that the readers know what to expect. So what we are going to discuss in the next sessions, that may also be briefly described so that the readers will get a general idea about what is going to what will be available in the subsequent portions. Now the abstract is the next part. The abstract, it summarizes usually in one paragraph, and we will discuss the introduction part a little bit later. So this is a misphrase, right? And the abstract usually is one paragraph, and the major aspect of the entire paper in the following sequence. It is presented in the following sequence. The problem is investigated, the method used, and the major findings, conclusions, and the overall length of the abstract should be 200 or 250 words. Up to 250 words, it is acceptable by many articles. So the abstract should contain the nature of the problem that is investigated, or description about the problem investigated, method used, and major findings and conclusions. That is the usual structure of the abstract. And the lengthy background information, that it should not contain a lengthy background information, then references to other literature, and a short any sort of illustrations or figures or tables should not be mentioned or included in the abstract. Abbreviations of terms may be confusing to readers because explanation is not given, so it is better not to use abbreviations in that one. And keywords are included at the end of the abstract. Usually all the articles require search words, at least 6 keywords that are the highlights of the paper that needs to be given as keywords at the end of the abstract. So this is another section where you have to avoid such things while writing an abstract. Should not be the background information, that is the first part of the abstract. That should not be much lengthy, and there should not be any references, illustrations, tables, figures, abbreviations, etc. And of course, you have to provide keywords. Now there are structured abstracts. The previous one is just the common format of the abstract, whereas structured abstract, the journal publisher, Emerald journals, etc., they prefer that type of abstracts. And structured abstracts means the abstract contains these much portions. It will contain purpose of the work, design, methodology, approach, then research limitations or implications, practical implications, originality value, keywords, and paper type, etc. All these things will be mentioned in the structured abstract, and subheadings may be available in the concerned abstract. From journal to journal, the titles, the required titles or the portions of the structured abstract will be different, but they will provide within the abstract, they will provide subheadings which will be available in the for example, you can see these. The first one, this is a normal abstract in which 150 to 250 word abstract with all the portions, general idea or general concept, then methodology, results, and discussions of the findings, conclusion, etc., were presented within a word limit of 150 to 250. Whereas in structured abstract, as I mentioned, abstract, background, results, conclusions, etc. are required, subheadings will be provided, and that type of abstract is known as a structured abstract. Some of the journals were actually using that type of abstract. So this is another one. This is our own paper, and this is a graphical abstract. Some journals or some type of papers require graphical abstract, which will graphically describe the overall work, starting from methodology to results and the final stage. The methodology actually, that part need to be presented as a graphical abstract. So this is another type of representation of abstract. Another one is extended abstract. Extended abstract means the conference organizers usually may use extended abstracts for review and decision to accept or reject the paper. And the extended abstract should be within a limit of 2000 words or a maximum of 4 pages, including appendix and references. So that includes references also. The abstract should include the following: that is the objectives of the work presented, contributions made, methodology used, conclusions, and theoretical and practical implications, even the references also. That all these things needs to be included in an extended abstract of 200 words. Usually, that should be submitted for conference or international conference organizers so that it will be accepted for presentation and other things. So this is one of the mispriced slide that I mentioned, and the first one is first area is title, the second area is say abstract, and the third one is introduction. So in the case of introduction, we begin the introduction by clearly identifying the subject area of interest, and establish the context by providing a brief and balanced review of pertinent to the published literature. Then clearly state the purpose of the study, provide a clear statement of the rationale for the approach to the problem studied, then describe the organization of the paper so that the readers know what to expect. So this is a slide that gives a brief idea on the structure of the abstract, sorry, in a substructure of the introduction. And the introductory test should contain the following paragraphs: about the general field of research, about the specific field of research, about the viewpoints of the research and the goals of the research or the objective of the research, and the overall organization of the paper, or what are the different components that is included in the paper. So that part needs to be included in the introduction part. Now see, this is an example of a synthesized literature. So usually when we are writing such research papers, especially in research, in the introduction and review portion, there is every possibility that there is a significant amount of plagiarism may be detected at that point. If you are just depending on the on different sources and copying and paste into the part, then that will be against the research and publication ethics. You need to consider the plagiarism component seriously. So to avoid that, you have to read all the papers, understand it, and you have to synthesize the literature by your own, in your own words. And one example of a synthesis process is given here. For example, the paragraph that is shown, in which Abe et al. Confirmed the earlier findings of Smith. However, both these reports can be contrasted to the results previously established by Piper. So we cited 3 papers. Okay, You compared the two and contrast it with the third one. These disparities may be due to the differences in the condition used in the respective experiments. These differences may appear inconsequential on paper, but their possible effect has not to date been satisfactorily addressed experimentally. So we are synthesizing such a paragraph based on three different references and overall idea or knowledge on that area. So see, in the above example, the authors have done the following: demonstrate a good knowledge of the papers concerned, the three papers. Critically examine the papers, highlighting the shortfall in what they have addressed. Then compare the papers, describing their similarities and differences. Contrasted the papers. They contrasted the first two papers with the observations of the third one, and describing their difference and qualities and attempting to explain why they might contrast. Then synthesized their findings into a very abstract sentence and added their own opinion to the findings, demonstrating knowledge in the field and the particular papers. So this is a good example of how to write the literature. Even if you are using in the introduction or review, you have to synthesize the content by examining different aspects. You have to read, understand the papers or understand the concept, then compare it with other workers and compare it with your own work. And if there are contradictions, then try to contradict and state that these findings will be contradictory to the other one. And then finally, during the discussion process, you can say that even though these two authors were saying, or our observations were in agreement with the first two, whereas where all means the other one may be contradicting your findings, that also needs to be mentioned. So that type of data synthesis should be done while preparing such a literature that can be used in introduction part or review part or even in a discussion. Now the next one is aim. The aim identifies what is going on to be tested in the experiment. This should be short, concise and clear. The aim of the experiment is to test whether that's an example. The aim of the experiment is to test whether light is required for photosynthesis to occur. So that can be considered as an aim which can be mentioned. You need a hypothesis and you need some experimental methodology to test the hypothesis, etc. So your aim is to check whether light is required for photosynthesis or not. So that is one example of an aim. Now if you want to check the aim, then certainly you require a hypothesis. The hypothesis is a prediction, and the hypothesis is not generally stated as such in the research papers, but you require a hypothesis to proceed with. Okay, so the hypothesis is not a separate section in the research paper, but aim can be mentioned or objective can be mentioned, but hypothesis is actually it should be there while proceeding with the experiment. It is not actually a written part of the paper. Hypothesis is a prediction of the outcome of the experiment. You have to use background information to make an educated prediction. And take the example, it is predicted that photosynthesis will occur only in leaves that are exposed to light and not in the leaves that are not exposed to light. This will be indicated by the presence or absence of starch in the leaves. So this is the hypothesis, and that can be tested using experimental methodology. Now, the next stage, this is also a hidden part, which is not actually a separate chapter. So the risk assessment is also done before starting the experimental part. Risk assessment to identify the hazards associated with the experiment and provide a method to prevent and minimize the risk. A hazard analysis should be done. The hazard is something that can cause harm, and risk is the likelihood that harm will occur from the hazard. So you have to identify whether there is some hazard and if there is any risk from the hazard that needs to be identified. And a table is an excellent way to present your risk assessment. Remember, you have to specify the type of harm that can occur from the hazard. Just mentioning the hazard is not sufficient. You have to mention the harm, if any, from the hazard. That needs to be mentioned also. It is not enough to simply identify the hazard. Okay. So do not write scissors are sharp or ETBR is carcinogenic. It is better you say that scissors are sharp and can cause injury. That should be mentioned. Or ETBR is carcinogenic and can cause cancer to the user. So such specific statement should be mentioned in the text so that somebody who is adopting that methodology will be cautious while handling ethylene bromide. That type of sentences. If there are hazards, that needs to be identified and mentioned in the text. And simple identification of the hazard is not sufficient, but also you have to mention the risk associated with that hazard. What will happen if it is not properly addressed? That also needs to be mentioned in the text. Now, after the aim and objective or aim or objective, the next part is the methodology. And whenever you are addressing the methodology, you have to take this hazard into consideration. Okay, that risk assessment should be there while preparing the methodology. Now, methodology or method has three parts generally: a list of every materials that is used, and steps of what you did in the experiment, then the scientific diagram of the experimental apparatus. So these are the main components that can be incorporated in the methodology part. Using a numbered list of the steps of your experimental procedure is much clearer than writing the whole paragraph of the text. So usually you can describe the entire procedure as a paragraph, but it will not be much readable and understandable, and whenever somebody else is adopting that one, it will be quite difficult. But if you are providing a numbered list of the steps to be followed, then that will be quite easy for somebody else to replicate the experiment. Okay. So the steps should be written in sequential order based on when they were performed. Okay, so there should be written, or experimental procedure should be written in the order of performance of that experiment. So the first experiment performed should be written first, and that too in the sequential order with a number. Specify any equipment that was used, and usually it should be mentioned with the brand name of the, or the company name or model name, etc., and that specific model number and the concerned brand name of the company, that all needs to be mentioned when you are describing the equipment. Then specify the quantity of the materials that are used. What are the materials and in which quantity it is used for preparing your reagents and other things. So you also need to use past tense and passive voice when you are writing your method, because it's already over, it's already done, and scientific reports were supposed to show the readers what you did in the experiment and not what you are going to do, so, or what you will do. So that means it's already completed, and you have to give the entire methodology in active, in past tense and passive voice. Now the next area is a result, and results. The body of the results section is a text-based presentation of the key findings, which includes references to each of the tables and figures. The text should guide the researcher through your results, stressing the key results which provide the answers to the questions investigated. So the text which is given in the results should guide the reader throughout the results and to the key findings which support the question, research question. Okay, and a major portion of the text is to provide clarifying information. So if a text or table or something, some data is provided, then the text portion that is incorporated in that result will it should explain or it should be able to clarify the result that is provided. Okay, and result means the observations that is obtained. And each table and or figures, table or figures must be referred individually and in sequence, indicating clearly the key results that each conveys. So the tables and graphs or figures should be sequentially arranged with clear titles and descriptions, and it should convey the results very clearly. Okay. Uh, the key results depends on the research question, and they might include obvious trends, important differences, similarities, correlations, maximums, minimums, etc. So that type of information should be there. That is related with the research question or our hypothesis that is being tested. So all the data related with the or the observations related with the your research question needs to be included in the results, and that may include trends, differences, similarities, correlations, maximum, minimum values, etc. Okay. Simple rules for presenting results using tables or figures. Each table or figure must include a brief description of the results being presented and other necessary information in the title. Table titles go above the table, and tables are read from top to bottom. Okay, so usually this titles should be represented on the top of the table, and figure titles usually they are represented below the table, and they are usually viewed from bottom to top. So anyway, the because the legends and other things of the figure will be on the top and descriptions. So usually we will start reading or looking into that figure from top to bottom, sorry, bottom to top, and figure title should be on the bottom and table title should be on the top, because we start from the top, reading the table from the top, and we'll be moving down. So the titles of the table should be on the top, and the figures or graphs should be on the bottom. Some things to avoid, that is, do not reiterate each value from the figure or table. Only the key result that each conveys needs to be mentioned. Then do not present the same data in both the table and figure. If you use use a table and draw another graph with the same data, that is not relevant, and only one of them is required. That is either you can use the table or the graph or the figure that is generated from the data. This is considered a redundant and a waste of space and energy, and decide which format is best for your results, and you can go on with that one. Do not report raw data values when they can be summarized as means or percentages, etc. So, for example, you have 100 or 500 observations, and if you present in a very long table spanning 5 or 6 pages, that will be irrelevant, or it is not that much easy to understand. So, in that case, what you have to do is you have to summarize the results. You can group the results, and you can take the means and percentages, etc. So the entire data will be consolidated into a single table, a simple table, and or a graph. So you have to summarize the data in a paper instead of presenting the raw data as such. The next topic is on this. That is a topic is discussion. The discussion is where you analyze and interpret your results and identify any experimental errors or possible areas of improvement. So you have to analyze and interpret your results, and also you have to identify the errors that has been occurred in the results in the performance of the experiment, and if you have some suggestions for better for improving the work, then that can also be suggested in the discussion. You should divide the discussion as following: one, trend in the results. So the relationship you observed between your independent and dependent variables. So usually dependent variable is the result of the experiment, and the independent variables were the factors being tested. So if there are some relation that you have observed, that can be represented as a trend. Example, the presence of a starch is indicated when addition of iodine causes the leaf to turn dark purple. The result showed that the starch was present in the leaves that were exposed to light, while the leaves that were not exposed to light did not contain starch. So this is an explanation about the result trend. It includes it uh, expresses the relationship between the independent and the dependent variable here. Now, the second part is a scientific explanation. Provide an explanation for of the results using scientific knowledge, theories, and other scientific resources you find. So, if you have a result, you can compare them, and if you observe something, then you have to give a scientific explanation based on some scientific knowledge or references or theories, etc. You can't simply state blindly anything, or you can just explain or support or suggest something. And everything or every explanation should be scientific with the already existing scientific knowledge or theory. So, you can see the example. As starch is produced during photosynthesis, these results show that the light plays a key role in photosynthesis. So, there we have already proven evidences that starch is produced during photosynthesis. So the observation that is made in this previous experiment indicates that there is a starch produced, and that means you connect that production of starch and its detection into photosynthesis. So it can be scientifically explained that light plays a key role in photosynthesis. So the starch is produced and that starch is detected. Okay. So and you cannot say or simply assume and argue something, and it should be based on some scientific knowledge and theories. So wherever you are making such scientific explanations, you have to cite some literature. Then validity. Validity refers to whether or not your results are valid. This can be done by examining your variables. So usually validity is required for your variables. You can check the variables for verifying whether it is valid or not. The independent variable of the experiment was amount of light that the leaves were exposed to. So one of the variable that you are studying is the amount of light that is applied to the leaves. And the covered and uncovered geranium leaf can be used here. For example, you can cover the leaves or uncover the leaves. Both can be used so that the quantity of the light that is falling on the leaves can be regulated. While the dependent variable was the presence of starch. So you are giving different quantities of the sunlight to leaves and checking the production of starch. So the starch is the dependent variable and the quantity of the light is the independent variable. So controlled variables were the size of the leaf sample during and duration of the experiment, the amount of time and the solutions were heated and the amount of iodine used, etc. were controlled variables. They were actually kept as uniform. Okay, so what is varying is the quantity of the light only, and the result, that is the quantity of the starch produced, will have some direct correlation. So whereas you have to keep all other parameters, the size of the leaf, the duration of the experiment, and the amount of solutions heated, the time to which the heating is done, and all such additional methodology should be same, so that they are controlled as controlled variables which will be uniform on both cases, so that there will not be any effect. Okay, so the validity of the experiment is actually it is one of the important factors. Usually such statistical methods are there, and if it is statistically valid while we are considering the results, the variables can be accepted. Otherwise, this relation, if it is statistically not valid, then uh, the results cannot be accepted with confidence levels. Reliability is another one. So, identify how you ensure the reliability of the results. So, to ensure the reliability, the only possibility is repetition. So, if your results needs to be reliable, then you have to repeat it. Show that you repeated your experiments. Cross-check your results with other groups, or collated your results with the class, or you can you can perform it many times. Again, you can check it with other groups who perform the same experiment under same conditions. So repetition of the same experiment under different conditions, or by different groups or persons will and obtaining the same results will increase the reliability of that experiment. An example, the reliability of the results was ensured by repeating experiments 5 times and comparing results with other groups. Since other groups obtained comparable results, the results were reliable. So, the only possibility of making the results reliable is repetition. Repetition by ourselves and by others. Then the next point is about accuracy. Accuracy should be discussed if your results are in the form of quantitative data, and there is an accepted value for the results. So accuracy is basically for the quantitative data. For qualitative data, we cannot mention that one. But anyway, if you are going for some quantitative database research, then accuracy is one important factor. Possible improvements. Identify any other errors on the or errors or risks found in the experiment when we are performing, and provide methods to improve it. In the discussion part, you have to mention possible improvement possibilities in the experiment, because you might have observed some errors or some drawbacks in the setup, and that needs to be addressed and mentioned so that further researchers can improve that one, and you can suggest improving that method and reaching a better or gathering more evidence in that line. And if there are none, then suggest new ways to improve the experimental design and minimize the errors and risk. If you don't have any errors, then also you can suggest improvement methods. So if you have some errors, suggest some methods to rectify it. And if you have some, if there is no errors at all, then also you can suggest improvement methods. For example, in my own thesis, I performed some viral screening like Toxoplasma rubella, cytomegalovirus, etc. That torch group infection in pregnancy-related complications. At that time, my work was based on ELISA method. Anti-antibody interaction based ELISA method was used for my study. And in my department, there was no PCR and molecular biology laboratory at that time. And later, in my thesis, I suggested that these results can be more reliably tested with the PCR-based diagnostic tools. Instead of going for an antibody-based detection with the minimum samples, I should have tested the same samples with the PCR-based methods in a very rapid manner. So, during the discussion part, I suggested that future works were necessary for a better screening based on molecular diagnostic tools. So that was a recommendation from my side. So if you have better tools and better improved designs of the experiment, that needs to be suggested. Example, possible improvements could be made by including control experiments and for testing, for example, testing whether the iodine solution turns back purple when added to water or methylated spirits. This would help to ensure that the purple color observed in the experiment is due to the presence of starch in the leaves rather than impurities. So, if there are some suggestions and further works to be done, that can be mentioned in the discussion part. And finally, we have the conclusion. And the conclusion part that states whether the aim was achieved and if your hypothesis was supported. And example is the aim of the investigation was achieved and it was found that the light is required for photosynthesis to occur. This was evidenced by the presence of starch in the leaves and had been exposed to that had been exposed to light, and the absence of starch in the leaves that had been exposed. That results are part or highlight part can be mentioned there, and these results support the proposed hypothesis. Whether it supports or reject the hypothesis, that part needs to be mentioned in the conclusion. Major findings followed by a brief discussion on the future perspectives and applications of the present work and other to other disciplines may be mentioned in the conclusion. Deductions or inferences drawn from the discussion needs to be mentioned. Generalizations, if any, needs to be mentioned. Items for further work may be mentioned in the or recommendations for future work may be mentioned in the conclusion. Negative conclusions such as dead ends. If your conclusion is negative result, then also you can mention it instead of ignoring it. And statements with investigated, studied, etc. are not conclusions. So you have to conclude based on your evidences. And just like a methodology statement, as we in this work we investigated that type of or studied the effect of something particular. So that type of statements should be avoided. Whereas you have to state what was the result that you observed and whether that results supports your hypothesis or not. Differences between results, conclusions, and recommendations that needs to be mentioned here. So assume that you are walking down a street and staring at treetops and stepped into a deep puddle or a gutter, and while wearing expensive new shoes. So naturally it will get wet. Your observation was something else or your focus was something else, and you accidentally your shoe get dirty by stepping into a gutter. What results, conclusions and recommendation might you draw from this situation? This is only an example. So some suggested answers were given below. Results of this incident is that the shoe gets soaked and wet, the leather cracked and it dried, then the soles separated from the tops. So that was the result of this incident. So now you can reach a conclusion. Those shoes were not waterproof and not meant to be worn while walking in water. In addition, the high price of the shoes is not closely linked with the durability. So you can reach many conclusions from the same incident. What will be the recommendations? In the future, the wearer of this type of a shoe should watch out for puddles or gutters, not just tree tops. So the attention should be there. And when buying shoes, the wearer should determine the extent of the shoes waterproofing and its warranty or quality, the durability, etc. needs to be considered. So that can be given as a recommendation. So this example is if you have a situation and some set of data, the conclusion that you are reaching out of that is more important. You have to reach proper conclusions, and blind conclusions or unrelated conclusions. You cannot say that looking into the treetop will spoil your shoes. That will not be a conclusion. Okay, it is related, but you know that with the proper scientific evidence, since the shoe was not waterproof and it was soaked in the water, that was the reason for the damage to the shoes. So that can be connected. But the initial stage of okay, if you are walking without looking into the road or walking or looking in the treetop, that will damage your shoes. That type of unwanted conclusions or unrelated conclusions should not be reached. Okay, and from that conclusions, once you reach the proper conclusions, then you can give recommendations. So in your conclusion, you can analyze the results and reach the conclusion, and also suggest some recommendations for solving that problems. So typical problems in conclusions, they include explanation overload. Do not overload the reader with unnecessary explanations, unrelated topics, and also uh, empty findings. Explain what the findings mean. Do not let the reader jump into his own her conclusions. You conclude by yourself, and if you just make an empty finding or empty statement, then it will force the user to reach their own conclusions. So that needs to be avoided. Ignoring negative results. Do not ignore the results that do not fit your expectations or negative results. So instead, use them and discuss to the point. And never ignore such negative results since it is negative and against your hypothesis. You cannot ignore such negative results. Then, broad statements should not be made, and do not make statements that are too broad, and limit the statement to the scope of your data that supports your data or that is validated by your data. And based on a few observations, you cannot make a very broader statements. Okay, so that is a and the expansive statement. Do not overstate the importance of your finding. Be modest rather than expansive. So you don't elaborately or don't speculate beyond your results. So with a very few evidence or very feeble evidence, you cannot overstate the findings and make very generalized statement. So you have to stick on to your data and evidence, and be modest and suggest only what the experience and the results suggests. Okay, and the evidence supports. Digression is another one, and that means stay focused on your research question. If you distract from that topic and move to some other location, staying out of focus, that needs to be avoided. So focus should not be lost from the research question or the hypothesis. And the list of the problems, always provide a thoughtful discussion of the errors in your question, and do not simply list them. So you have to, if there are some errors or some drawbacks in your experiment and that is included in the conclusion, you just address that issue, and instead of simply stating that okay, that such an error has occurred, because you can explain why it is so and what are the solutions for that. That type of addressing the problem is to be done. Then next one is a repetition of a message. So repetition that is throughout the writing part. You have to consider something to be repeated. So repeat is a good way of way to learn. So in science, clarity overrides elegance. Therefore, repeat to avoid ambiguity. So if you want to make something clear, you have to repeatedly write or repeatedly and tell somebody. So if I am repeating many times the same thing, that means that much clarity will be there for the topic or for the concept. So the main message or the contributions of the paper. So for every paper there will be some contributions or some significant findings, and that significant findings or the main message of the paper needs to be repeated at some locations where one is the title, first one. So that should be highlighted in the paper so that it will be easily noticed by the scientists. Then it should be mentioned in the abstract. Then at least 3 times in the body, in introduction, results and discussion, result or discussion, and conclusion. So at various stages you can again at least 5 or 6 times you can repeat the findings or main contributions of your work or of your work. So that will give a clear-cut idea about the significance and the contributions of the work. Finally, you have acknowledgements. Acknowledgements, you have to acknowledge to the individuals, institutions not mentioned elsewhere in the paper, and who have provided significant help in thinking up or designing, carrying out the work, and etc. And also to the outside reviewers of the paper, and to any sources of funding or funding agencies of the project, etc. So all these things, all these parties to be acknowledged in the paper. And next portion is the references. A full list of papers and text cited in the paper is provided with the full reference information. Then provided as a alphabetical list by the first author's name of the reference publication, or arranged in numerical order. There are basically two referencing styles. One is a numbered style and another one is alphabetic order style. So depending upon the paper or the journal that you are publishing, they will have their own specific format for referencing, and you can use any of them, like alphabetic order arrangement of the references, or numerical order in which first used to first cited, that that order of the reference will be numbered format, in which first used reference will be cited first in the end. And it's not a bibliography. A bibliography contains references that might have been read but not specifically cited in the text. So scientific papers requires the references, not bibliography. So if you are attaching, say, 50 references at the end and not citing in the text, so that means bibliography means you read all these articles and you got the concept and you write the paragraph. Instead of specifically citing some sentence or some concept to a particular author or a particular paper, you are just reading all these things, and that's only contributing to the author's knowledge database. Okay, and finally the author writes something and the bibliography is attached at the end. That is not the way of a scientific writing. We need references. If you are making a specific statement in introduction, review, or discussion, wherever, that sentence or that concept, specific concept, needs to be cited with a specific reference. And bibliography is not the way of scientific writing. So now this is the last slide, in which we can see there are typical sequence of tasks while writing a paper. So it will start with defining a problem, that is the introduction. So perform a literature review, formulate a model and solve it. Then while performing the review, you can write the review section. By formulating the model, you can write the methodology. Also, this is the methodology part. Then you can create tables and figures during the methodology, means execution of the experimental part, and you can write the results. So then you can prepare the discussion. After getting the results, you can write the discussion and then conclusion, and then finally with this introduction, in the review and this conclusion, all these things will be used to write the introduction part. So based on the conclusion and literature, then the introduction is not the first part that is written in a paper. Not that, it will be coming at the end. That is abstract is actually at the final stage, whereas introduction is written after completing the conclusion, discussion and conclusion. So the introduction will give a very specific idea. While reading the introduction, the overall idea and focus of the work will not be lost, since it is written after the conclusion. And then appendices and tables, preferences, etc. All these things can be done while writing results and discussion, etc. And after writing the introduction, you will write the abstract and finalize the paper. So this is how the workflow of the scientific writing is done. Thank you.